Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we are stepping back in time to one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, 1947. We often look at independence through the lens of the political freedom, the triumph of the freedom fighters and the hoisting of the tricolors. But what about the economic reality? What kind of balance sheets did the newborn nation actually inherit after 2 centuries of the colonial rule? Over the next few minutes, we aren't just going to look at dry numbers. We are going to uncover the systematic dismantling of once vibrant economy, look at the structural stagnation left behind, and truly understand the starting line from which the modern India had to run. Let's dive in. To understand how deep the rabbit hole goes, we first need to dispel a myth. India wasn't always a poor country. Before the colonial era, it was an economic powerhouse. Our agriculture was self sustaining, and our artisans were globally renowned. If you wore a fine cotton or the legendary Dakai muslin, famously called Malmal, you were wearing the gold standards of global luxury. But when the colonial administration took over, the fundamental purpose of the economy shifted. India was systematically transformed from the independent exporter of finished goods into a mere supplier of raw materials to fuel British own industrial revolution. The colonial government never bothered to systematically measure India's national income. However, visionary individuals like Dadabhai Naoroji, William Digby, and later Dr. V.K.R.V. Rao, whose estimates were considered the most statistically significant, stepped up to do the math. The figures they uncovered were staggering. During the first half of the 20th century, India aggregate real output grew at less than 2% per year. And if you look at the per capita growth, the matrix that tells us how much an individual standard of living is improving, it was logged at miserable zero point 0.5 annually. The economy wasn't just resting, it was practically paralyzed. Now let's look at where the vast majority of Indian actually lived and breathed. The agriculture sector. Roughly 88% of the population lived in rural villages, depending directly or indirectly on farming. You would think that with such a massive workforce, agriculture would be thriving, but it was under a chokehold. Why? Look no further than the infamous Zamindari system, particularly in Bengal Presidency. The colonial state outsourced tax collection to landlords, known as zamindar, and these zamindars were not interested in upgrading the land, installing irrigation, or helping the farmer. Their sole mandate was extraction. The revenue deadlines were absolute. If a farmer experienced a drought or a catastrophic famine, it did not matter. The specified sum had to be paid on time, or the Zamindar lost his rights. This ruthless pressure passed straight down to the tenant cultivators, stripping away from any profit margins they had left. If agriculture was in decay, what about the factories? Well, the industrial story is one of the deliberate deindustrialization. The colonial rulers pursued a twofold policy. First, destroy the Indian historic handicraft industry, and second, turn India into a captive market for British machines made goods. Because British textiles were mass produced in mechanized mills, they flooded the Indian market at incredibly cheap prices. Our local weavers simply couldn't compete. Millions of artisans lost their livelihoods overnight, causing them to crowd back into an already struggling agriculture sector. Yes, towards the late of the 19th and the early 20th century, modern industries did begin to take root, like the native cotton mills expanding in the west and the foreign dominated jute mill in Bengal. We even saw the birth of the Tata Iron and Steel Company or TISCO in 1907, but these were isolated oases in a vast desert. There was an intense deficit in capital good industry. We didn't have the heavy machinery sector needed to build other factories. We were entirely dependent on imports just to expand our industrial footprints. Now, this brings us to a highly debated topic. infrastructure. We often hear the argument, well, at least the British gave India the railways. Let's look closer at the underlying motivation. Roads and rail networks were not built for the welfare or the social development of Indian people. They were laid out for strategic military deployment and swift economic extraction. The railway introduced in 1850 did profoundly affect the structure of the economy. On the positive side, they broke the geographical and the cultural barriers, allowing people to travel long distances. But economically, they acted as an accelerator of colonial exploitation. The rail lines were positioned specifically to connect rural law, rural raw material hubs directly to major ports for exporters. Rather than helping village stores food during shortages, the transport network actually accelerated the outflow of sources. Similarly, the expensive electric telegraph system was built primarily to maintain a strict administrative control and imperial authority over the subcontinent. Every piece of iron laid down was designed to serve the home country first. If you want to understand the true human cost of these economic policy, you need to look at the demographic data. In 1881, the first official comprehensive census was conducted. It revealed a population caught in a cycle of extreme vulnerability. An essential milestone to remember here is that year 1921, which historians call the year of transition. Before 1921, Indian population growth was erratic, surging and then plunging due to the frequent famines and epidemics. After 1921, the population entered the stage of consistent sustained growth. But the social indicators of this population were devastating. Overall literacy was stuck below a shocking 16%, and female literacy plummeted to a critical 7%. Public health infrastructure was almost non existent. Waterborne and airborne diseases ran rampant. Think about these two numbers. The infant mortality rate was the heart wrenching 218 per thousand live births, compared to around 26 today. And the average life expectancy of an Indian on the eve of independence just 32 years. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a human tragedy. Finally, let's look at the foreign trade. Historically, India was a trading giant. Under British rule, however, a strict monopoly trade structure was imposed. More than half of all Indian trade volumes were legally restricted exclusively to British market. And when the Suez Canal opened in 1869, it acted as an economic superhighway, cutting transit times and tightening the London's direct grip on Indian trade logistics. This created a massive paradox. If you look at the India's trade balance ledger, it showed a massive export surplus. India was exporting far more value than it was importing. Normally, the export surplus makes a country rich, but in our case, it led to domestic scarcity. Why? Because what Dadabhai Naoroji famously say, the drain of wealth. The gold and silver earned from our exports never enter the Indian economy. Never ever. Instead, that hard earned surplus was immediately shifted by the colonial administration to pay the official salaries, British military campaigns overseas, and corporate profits. India was basically bled dry. So, here we are in August 1947. The British left behind an economy with a devastated agriculture base, a tiny industrial sector, a fragile population with a life expectancy of just 32, and an empty treasury. The colonial chapter was over, but a massive question mark loomed over the subcontinent. How do you rebuild a broken nation, millions from absolute scratch? What decisions do you make when you have no blueprint? Do you trust the free market or do you take the total state control? This is exactly what we are going to explore in our very next video. We will dive deep into the fascinating era of the Indian economy from 1950 to 1990, the age of the 5-year plan, the struggle for self-reliance, the Green Revolution, and the complex reality of the license Raj. It is the ultimate story of economic survival, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. If you find value in exploring where we started, please take a brief moment to subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who loves history or economics. I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comment below. Which of these colonial economic policies surprised you the most? Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next chapter of Indian economic journey.